Există o mare preocupare acum în Europa în privința gazului natural lichefiat, importat masiv de europeni din America. Și se tem strategică, s-ar putea ca această dependență prea mare de Statele Unite ale Americii să ne pună exact în poziția în care a ajuns Rusia.
Păi vezi oglinda, e o simetrie perfectă. Rușii se tem că prin aruncarea în brațele chinezilor vor deveni mult prea dependenți de ei, la fel cum se tem și europenii care au renunțat la gazul rusesc pentru a cumpăra gazul lichefiat american. Numai că europenii sunt un pic mai cerebrali și încă au niște modalități de negociere pentru că n-au semnat acordul pe termenul atât de lung propus de Statele Unite cu privire la gazul lichefiat. Pentru că americanii, când i-au prins pe europeni cu chiloții în vine, iartă-mi expresia, au forțat imediat tranzacțional treaba și au zis, gata, nu mai aveți gaz de la ruși, păi vă dăm noi pe 100 de ani, luați gaz de la noi. Ceea ce europenii n-au căzut în această capcană și au zis, bă, luăm gaz de la voi, că n-avem încotro, dar hai să luăm și noi, pe un termen mai puțin, vedem care e treaba, poate se mai liniștesc apele. Și atunci americanii n-au reușit să-și impună strategia de a înlocui pentru următoarea 100 de ani necesarul de gaz și de resurse energetice pe care europenii luau de la ruși cu ale lor. Dar e adevărat că numai anul ăsta, până acum, 80% din importurile de gaz lichefiat europenii le-au luat de la americani. E mult, adică să depinzi 100% de un partener care se poate comporta cum s-a comportat Donald Trump cu toate sinusoidalele astea și cu toate schimbările astea de macaz, e destul de neplăcut, adică e destul de complicat.
Plus că poate să vină Donald Trump într-o iarnă așa,
da, să-ți
facă un cadou de Crăciun și să zică, băi, știți ce, v-am tot zis cu asta cu Groenlanda, nu m-ați ascultat. Ia dați în Groenlanda, că dacă nu, nu mai vedeți gaz. E mult mai tranzacțional abordarea decât să trimiți soldați.
Da. Păi n-au făcut și rușii așa? Au zis, băi, nu ne mai supărați cu Ucraina și cu nu știu ce, că închidem robinetul și vă lăsăm în frig. Europenii au simțit tipul ăsta de amenințare și de presiune. Și atunci n-ar vrea să-l repete, adică n-au scăpat de dracu ca să dea de taxul. Adică europenii s-au prins că carnasierii ăștia mari, și rușii și americanii, bă, când te prind, te înghesuie și nu-ți mai dau nicio șansă. Pentru că sunt puternici, sunt persuasivi, au avantaje, îți bagă pumnul în gură, te prind acolo în zona cea mai vulnerabilă.
Schimbă
și te
regulile jocului când au
Schimbă regulile jocului, doar limita lor morală îi poate împiedica să nu meargă prea departe, ceea ce e o vrăjeală care trebuie preîntâmpinată cu înțelepciune din timp. Iar aici mi se pare că europenii au luat o decizie corectă de a nu se arunca așa la prima strigare și să zică, da, domne, luăm gazul lichefiat de la voi acum pentru forever. Nu, hai să facem niște contracte, vedem cum merge treaba. Adică în tranzacția asta europenii n-au căzut chiar cu tot într-o capcană întinsă de americani.
In 2022, Europe was desperate for gas, turning to Washington for emergency supplies. By 2025, it had quietly moved on. The ports that once bustled with US tankers are now eerily quiet, replaced by underground arteries carrying gas from Norway and North Africa. Europe never made a grand announcement. It simply got to work. Today, every American tanker that arrives helps fund the pipelines being built to replace it. The White House once called it energy dominance. Europe now calls it independence. And by the time the US realized what was happening, the global energy map had already shifted, without America at the center. According to Bloomberg, in 2024, the US exported over 92 billion cubic meters of liquefied natural gas, LNG, to Europe, more than half of its total LNG exports. What once looked like dominance now feels more like dependence. Because behind those record shipments, Europe was already working to cut the cord. This shift wasn't born out of ideology, but out of urgency. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 sent energy prices soaring, European factories shut down, fertilizer plants paused, and families faced winter heating bills triple their usual amount. The Financial Times reported that in early 2023, industrial output across the Eurozone dropped 2.4%, driven directly by energy costs. The lesson was clear. If your energy comes by ship, it can be delayed, diverted, or bought out from under you. European leaders knew they needed to anchor their energy systems back to the ground. Europe cannot build its security on floating cargoes, said former EU Energy Commissioner Kadri Simpson in June 2025. That comment marked a key shift. A continent that once championed open markets began investing in fixed infrastructure, pipelines over ports. That summer, the European Commission approved the €65 billion Repower Infrastructure Plan, prioritizing cross-border gas connections that had previously been seen as secondary or regional. Projects like the Baltic Pipe from Norway to Poland, the Greece-Bulgaria interconnector, and the Southern Gas Corridor from the Caspian region were suddenly reclassified as strategic. Every new pipeline became a quiet signal. Europe would not be relying on American LNG forever. And for good reason. The Wall Street Journal found that pipeline gas delivered to Central Europe costs about 30% less than imported LNG once you factor in the costs of liquefaction, transport, and regasification. For German steel plants and Italian chemical manufacturers, that kind of savings means the difference between operating and shutting down. Europe stopped waiting and started building. But as this transformation unfolded, Washington was still celebrating the LNG boom that ironically was laying the groundwork for its decline. Between 2016 and 2024, the US spent over $100 billion on new LNG export terminals, confident that global demand, especially in Europe, would only keep rising. By 2023, the US had surpassed Qatar and Australia to become the world's top LNG exporter, shipping over 12 billion cubic feet per day. In Washington, this was hailed as the rise of an energy superpower. So the US doubled down. By early 2025, 7 more LNG terminals had been approved on the Gulf Coast, with plans to add another 73 million tons of export capacity by 2028. But all these investments relied on one assumption, that Europe would remain a steady customer. That assumption was already unraveling. Europe's reliance had exposed its weakness. Its solution? A structural overhaul. Even the European Investment Bank, which had once refused to fund fossil fuel infrastructure, reversed course and started labeling certain pipelines as security infrastructure. Between 2024 and 2025, Norway's Equinor, Azerbaijan's SOCAR, and Algeria's Sonatrach all signed long-term supply agreements with the EU. These deals were not political gestures. They were pragmatic decisions to prioritize reliable supply through fixed infrastructure. While the US promoted the flexibility of its spot market system, Europe wanted predictability, and it had good reason. In February 2025, the Reuters shipping desk tracked several US LNG tankers bound for Spain that abruptly changed course mid-Atlantic when South Korea outbid the European buyers. Legally, the cargo redirection was allowed. Strategically, it was devastating. It showed European buyers that American gas could disappear the moment a better price appeared elsewhere. That realization broke trust more deeply than any diplomatic fallout. Europe acted quickly. It expanded gas storage, enforced minimum reserve levels, and ramped up its interconnector program. By October 2025, Bloomberg reported that gas storage stood at 82%, lower than the previous year, but now better distributed across the continent thanks to new internal pipelines. Energy security was evolving, from a marketplace to a network. This shift in Europe's energy strategy isn't about forgiving Russia. It's about protecting Brussels from Washington. The European Commission's energy plan, published in July 2025, deliberately avoids mentioning US LNG. Instead, it focuses on what officials call regional resilience. That dry bureaucratic phrase masks a much bigger decision. Europe no longer wants any single supplier, even a friendly one, to have too much control. In Washington, LNG is still viewed as a geopolitical tool, but tools only work if people keep using them. European leaders increasingly see American gas as an emergency option, not a strategic pillar. One EU diplomat put it plainly to Reuters in August. "We appreciate US supply, but we no longer depend on it." this quiet decoupling is already affecting markets. Bloomberg Intelligence reported that the resale value of LNG carriers dropped 18% in the second quarter of 2025, as long-term demand forecasts were revised downward. Planned terminal expansions in Spain and Poland have been delayed, waiting for clearer market signals. The once celebrated US LNG shipping industry is now drifting toward overcapacity. Meanwhile, Europe's pipelines are busier than ever. Norway's Equinor continues to deliver steady volumes directly into Europe. Gas exports from Azerbaijan via the Trans-Adriatic pipeline increased by 20% this year. Even Algeria, often overlooked, is now Europe's fourth largest gas supplier, according to data from SOCAR. The continent's energy lifelines have rotated from across the Atlantic to across the Mediterranean. There's a deeper political shift underway, one that's harder to measure but easy to feel. By reconnecting to its neighbors instead of relying on distant partners, Europe is regaining something it had lost: strategic calm. Energy debates still happen, but gas ships no longer dominate high-level talks. Ministers now focus on negotiating transit rights instead of begging for cargo. In this new landscape, infrastructure has become diplomacy, built in steel, not spoken in speeches. Back in the United States, a growing disconnect is becoming clear. The Department of Energy still forecasts LNG export capacity growing steadily through 2030. But the State Department's envoys are reporting a decline in American influence in European energy discussions. America's leverage used to come from scarcity, from being able to supply what others could not. But today, abundance has weakened that power. The question for investors has flipped. It's no longer about whether the US can supply gas, but whether the world still wants gas in this form. The IMF's 2025 World Economic Outlook highlights the shift. It projects that by 2050, electricity will make up 48% of manufacturing energy use in Europe, compared to just 34% in North America. As renewable energy expands, natural gas is slowly becoming a victim of its own success, a transitional fuel nearing the end of its transition. Across Europe, pipelines now carry quiet certainty beneath the ground. In the Gulf of Mexico, tankers sit, waiting for buyers who aren't calling as often. On trading floors in London and Houston, prices flicker on screens, but they move less and matter less. The US built its energy empire on motion cargo, constantly moving prices, chasing opportunity. Europe is building a new kind of power, one based on stillness, on steady flows that never leave. Somewhere between these two visions lies the future of energy.